我们掌声欢迎我们的讲者。
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Davis. I know on your marquee it says Matt. I am a contributor and evangelist, primarily to Asia, for Aurelia. My Twitter is there. I'd encourage all of you to follow me, tweet at me if you have any questions during the presentation, or if you're down the road you decide to pick up Aurelia and use it in your application, and you have questions, please contact me. Yeah, just stop working. Okay, so first I just want to tell you a little bit about me, why I'm here. So I am an original Aurelia member. Actually, when the founder of Aurelia was thinking about creating a framework, we were good friends at the time, and so we would sit down and talk about ideas, and they were mainly his ideas, but I was giving him feedback. So I've been involved from the start. I've seen it kind of grow since about December of last year. I'm also primarily serving as an evangelist. I have contributed some code to Aurelia, but it's mainly just bug fixes and things. More my focus is helping other people be successful with Aurelia. I think it's a great platform, and the only thing missing between a great platform and great successes with the platform is good examples in the middle. I've been active on Stack Overflow. By a show of hands, does anybody use Stack Overflow? Okay. I know that the language support is a little iffy, so. I've also been lately writing more blogs and tutorials, and I'm getting into templates as well. A very important part of how Aurelia will be distributed will be much like, say, WordPress. When you start a WordPress blog, you typically go to ThemeForest or some website that has pre-built templates that make your app look nice, and make your blog look nice. And we want to kind of leverage this in a whole application level with Aurelia. So I've gotten into writing templates. Those will be distributed by GitHub, and I'll have some links to it at the end, but today I'm going to mainly look at my most recent template, which is mainly built for authentication and some best practices. So I wanted to demo that. I'm based in Asia. I'm actually living in Sapporo, Japan at the moment, so not too far. I'm the only Aurelia member out in Asia, so I'm doing my best to come out and meet people and just kind of be a point of contact so that people can be successful with Aurelia, not just in America or in the West, but all over the world. Prior to joining Aurelia, and actually concurrently, I was part of a team building an application called Easy Territory. A really cool application. It was a mapping application built on Durandal, which is the predecessor to Aurelia. So it's successful. They're making tons of money with this Durandal application, and Aurelia is just that much better than Durandal. I've been writing JavaScript since 2010, and having been one of the main contributors on this Durandal application, I had to dive into some of the deep parts of JavaScript just to get optimal performance. Other than that, specialize in GIS and .NET. I'm going to be developing some Microsoft-friendly templates for those of you with a Windows. I see a lot of Macs out there. got a Red Bull, pardon me. All right, so I'm pretty sure, given that our first talk was about a single-page application framework, React Native, that everybody knows what a single-page application framework is, what it should do, what it ought to do. But I still think that we've kind of not focused on that as the JavaScript community enough to say when is a good time to use a JavaScript framework, a single-page application framework, and when should we try something else. So I just wanted to cover that real briefly. A lot of it might be stuff that you've already thought about or know. It's all the power of the web, and that's really important. First of all, there's no install required. There's a lot of attention and marketing pushed into getting people just to hit the download button on the App Store or Google Play. I'm sure many of you have tried to use an application, a web application, and instead of seeing your application, the first half of the page is like, please install our application. And you're thinking, why can't I just use it the way it is right now? This is something, we shouldn't be showing those half-page, please download something, when we can do it right in the browser just as good. So there's no install required, there's no marketing or anything. They're already at your website, they already want to use it, and that's important. The application can be automatically updated. It's not a huge deal because the App Store and Google Play are pretty good about automatically updating apps, but you know, permissions change. Sometimes your app doesn't get updated and you get people with really bad user experiences. It's one unified experience. People are very polarized on this. There are some people in one camp who think if an application is running in Android, it needs to look and feel like Android. If an application is running in Windows Phone, if anybody has a Windows Phone, it needs to feel like a Windows Phone. And if it's on iOS, it needs to feel like iOS. There are other people, and I'm one of them, who thinks this is not a great thing. People shouldn't go to your application and think, oh, this feels like Android. They should go to your application and say, oh, this feels like that app that I really wanted to use. I'm using it. I like this. They should identify with your app and not with your platform. So I would say that's a huge plus for using a single-page application framework, because you get one unified experience no matter whether you're on the web, on a desktop, if you go from iOS to Android, if you have a PC but you have an iOS phone, you get the same experience with your app, and I think that's a good thing. And then, very, very, very important, especially to the people who are interested in the finance of the application, is one code base. The right ones really does happen with web, and that saves lots and lots of money. It's super important, especially for startups, which I'm sure many of us here are involved in startups. You don't have a lot of resources, you don't have a lot of time, you need to be the first mover, you need to control your costs. You want to write once and have your application work great for everyone. But, on the other hand, it's not just a website. It also has all the power of a native application. So for example, as demonstrated earlier in the React Native demo, you can do all these dynamic responsive things. You can track history. You can input text on one part of your application, navigate elsewhere, and that text is going to stay there. And that's a good feeling. That feels like an application. That doesn't feel like, 1995 internet, kind of old and clunky. Multiple views, states, management, history, all the things that you would do in an application are available to you in the browser. And a single-page application lets you take advantage of that to emulate that experience very well. But even more than that, and this is kind of dovetailing at the moment, is there are all these other technologies that native apps leverage that web apps used to not be able to leverage. Offline, for example, accelerometer. NFC is kind of being developed, so I don't think it's a high priority for anybody, but it's a good example of something that's coming into standards with native on web. But the one I do want to look at is push notifications. Push notifications Push notifications used to be something that was very exclusive and very important to native applications. But just recently, Facebook, for the mobile web, has launched using push notifications so that if you're just using the website will start sending push notifications through Chrome or whatever browser you're using to your handset. I think it's only available on Chrome, but it's still a great example of something that used to be a reason why we needed native and we don't anymore. So all that to say, that's kind of the benefit. Why, like when do we decide to use it and when don't we? The first thing you're going to want to evaluate is my app complex enough? Examples of not enough complexity for an application would be if you're doing a blog. A blog doesn't really need a lot of interactivity, it's just something to read. Another example is just a personal web page or a business web page. Again, not a lot of interactivity. It's not going to solve any problem that you have, so don't bother putting in the extra effort. But if you do need all that functionality, if you do need to kind of track states, Spotify from the 9 a.m. presentation was a really good example. That is when you want to start leveraging the power of an SPA. Desktop users, and this is what I don't think people often think about, if your users are only using the mobile experience occasionally, you don't really need to design a whole app for them. It's kind of a marketing thing, but it's not. It's hard to get them to download that. If your main users are desktop users, build a really nice web application and then fit that into mobile experiences or do mobile first development, but still target your target market. A great example for this is I built this slide deck in Google, what do they call it? Slides? Google Slides. I did a little bit of it on the phone, but it wasn't a good experience. I needed to do it because I had some extra stuff, little edits to make, but most of this was written on the desktop. And they built an SPA, they also built a mobile application, but I just didn't use it. But they built a really good single-page application for making the slide deck. Another one to think about is if your users are occasional users. If somebody is going to Google and searching for something and then finding your website, you probably don't want to immediately ask them to install something. They don't know what your website is yet. They just got there. Good examples of this, in Japan we have something called tabelo, which is for people saying, oh, I went here to eat today and it was good and it was expensive and things like that. So tracking food and places like that. Another example being Stack Overflow, where people often are just Googling a question and getting a Stack Overflow result. In both cases, you don't want to immediately ask your user, hey, please install an app. You want to show them the information that they came here for. And those kinds of users, when you're engaging those kinds of users, single-page application has a lot of potential. And finally, I mentioned this before, but when you need an inexpensive cross-platform solution, so maybe your application does belong on mobile, but you are just trying to get it out the door so you can be the first mover, which is so important. An SPA solves that need. You can build an SPA and come back to native later. A great example of that is Gitter. I don't know if it's picked up here, it's kind of new in America, but every GitHub repo has a Gitter chat room where people can talk about it. And they started with a single-page application, and they're picking up users very quickly, which got them the funding they needed to hire native developers. Very important. The next thing is when not to use an SPA. I put pictures of red pandas. I love red pandas, so I hope you enjoy them. I mentioned this before. Don't overdo it. If you have a blog or a personal website, save your time. Don't overdo it. I previously mentioned in a previous talk that I did over in Japan, if you have dedicated users, and I used Facebook and Twitter as an example, people are constantly opening up Facebook, posting something, and then doing something else. But this doesn't seem to be the case anymore, as Facebook has delivered an experience that is equivalent, if not better, on the website rather than the native app. So I kind of wanted to mention that you might think that, but I don't think that's going to be the case in the near future. And then of course, if you require native functionality, 3D games, I think, are going to go the way of number 2. 3D games will come to single-page applications eventually as browser standards get better, but at the moment, you're just not going to get the same experience. Another example is peer-to-peer. If you're using, I don't know if it's big here, Bitcoin, that relies on peer-to-peer technology, and you can't do that in web. So that would not be a good case. Okay, so now that we've established, okay, here's my application, it fits these criteria, it's a good single-page application. Now we need to sell you on Aurelia. Why use Aurelia? Why not use, React or Ember or Angular? First, I hesitate to say future-proof because nothing in technology is future-proof, but it has been designed with the future in mind. So it's built on all the latest standards, such as ES 2015, ES 2016. In fact, Aurelia helped influence the way that ES 2016 is going, particularly with decorators. And web components, but the web component spec is kind of back and forth a little bit. But we try to look at those specs, we try to see what the community at large has agreed to, and then we try to follow suit. Because we know that 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, this is going to be a standard thing for browsers. It's going to be fast, it's going to be performant. Let's leverage that. Let's not try to do something else. And that's something that some of the other SPA frameworks are not doing at all, and that is something that makes Aurelia quite special. A good example of that is Angular 2 was built originally on AtScript, which has since been dropped by Google in favor of TypeScript. So they tried to do their own thing and said, you guys don't know what you're doing, we're doing our own thing, and then had to turn back because it wasn't working. The founder, Rob Eisenberg, is extremely experienced in building frameworks. He's been doing it for at least 10, if not more years. His biggest framework was Caliburn Micro, which was for the .NET stack, and that was very big. And it's being used in some very big organizations, including, I think I can say Walmart, but some others that we can't say. But it's being leveraged by people who need this every single day. So he knows what he's doing, he's had a lot of experience, and he's thought about these problems and solved them over and over and over. And for that reason, a lot of people have come behind him and said, we kind of trust your vision here. It's also open source, and it's free forever. So you don't have to worry about anything becoming expensive or if there's any risk in using it. It's open source. I think we're at hundreds of people have now contributed to it, including members of some competing teams, which is really interesting. And we have a core team of 16 members who every day are working on this at least a little bit. None of us are getting paid for it yet. We have that kind of down the road, but we're doing it in our free time because we believe in it and we love it. It's also commercially supported by Durandal Inc. And there's a reason why this is important. A lot of open source frameworks go dark. It's happened to me so many times where I just want one bug fixed and nobody's around to fix it, and nobody's around to take my pull request, and that's just the end of the framework, and it's unfortunate for everybody involved. Aurelia is free, but it is also the core commercial interest of a corporation. And in other words, if we don't support it, if our users fail, then we fail too. So we're just as invested in this as you are. And that is something that nobody else has. Additionally, we have great community support. Our Gitter channel is full of over 2,000 members last I checked. We have third-party plugins already being written, templates already being written. It's coming to beta in about 3 or 4 weeks. So we're pre-beta, and we have people already submitting third-party content into this. So the community is extremely strong, and a lot of people really believe in it. So what is Aurelia? That's what makes it special, but what actually is it? It's been designed with a few core beliefs, modularity being a key one. The whole Aurelia platform is divided into about 20 different repos on GitHub. And you don't need to use every one of them. In fact, I think maybe only 2 or 3 are actually interdependent at all. And that means if you don't like the way we're doing something, if you don't like the way we're binding to the DOM, if you think it's slow and not performant, you can take our repo and fork it and fix it and start using that, and you can probably sell us on adopting some of that. Or you can throw out our repo altogether and use something else. In fact, it's extensible to the point where we have at least one user who is using React with Aurelia just in one little part because it's so fast and it's so performant that they're able to hybridize the two and get the most performance of the two. What else? It's performant because we, unlike some other frameworks, for example, Angular 1 used a dirty checking strategy where it would look at all of the data that's being injected into the DOM and check for changes. We don't do that. That's not performant. And so we leverage all of the latest standards on the web, such as Object Observe, to only update the DOM and only do processing when we know we need to. So we've made a performance like a very important part of this framework. And it's also convention-based. And the reason convention-based is good is because it saves you a lot of time of bootstrapping an application. You have to write extremely little code to get an Aurelia app up and running, and we like that. A good kind of comparison to make is where maybe other frameworks will give you a big toolbox with lots of tools to solve really hard problems. Aurelia gives you an employee who's really smart, and he kind of knows what you want to do, and he's going to go do that, and you don't have to tell him. But if you want to change something, all you have to do is say, hey, I don't want it done that way, do it this way, and he'll do it. And so I think that's a really strong argument in favor of Aurelia, especially for the convention base. It has various components. It has two-way binding and templating. I put two-way in parentheses because I thought it wasn't needed. But Angular 2 is coming out, and it has very limited two-way binding, and this is a new thing, and it makes it a little difficult to develop with. And so Aurelia does have two-way binding in every sense. Anywhere you can take in input from the DOM, you can pull back that input and interact in a two-way manner. It has routing and history, so we talked about that earlier this morning, but it does leverage all of the DOM APIs, the browser APIs for tracking history and pushing states. You can do this through hash bangs, like the old Twitter paradigm, or you can use this through using actual history.pushState, which is really nice. It uses dependency injection, which is good for testing. All of the core Aurelia components are built around being modular and testable. All of the applications I personally write, I take some of that stuff out because it just keeps it a little bit simpler, and I'm not building large projects, but the options are there to keep it simpler, to make it really robust and well tested. It has an event aggregator, which is important for communicating between when you componentize your application. You need to be able to bring everything back together, and it has a very powerful and tested event aggregator. And it has plugin support. We built 3 plugins ourselves: internationalization, animation, and validation. And we're still pre-beta, and those were kind of last of the list, so there's still some kinks that we're working out. But actually, somebody else has come on board and written their own plugin for authentication and doing OAuth with various services like Facebook and Twitter. And it's extremely extensible. You can plug in other things like Line. And so it's really interesting to see that plugin framework being leveraged. And lastly, it's got a very robust workflow that starts from just picking a template. I want an application kind of like this, and ends up at bundling at delivering your application and deploying it, which some of the other frameworks are not doing either. They're just kind of focusing on the framework. We consider the whole workflow from start to finish. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to demonstrate some parts. I'm going to leave out some parts because they're a little bit time consuming. But we're going to look at writing an Aurelia application. I mentioned before that I wrote a template. I call it Sentry. And it is for authentication purposes. And the basic process of writing an Aurelia application starts with doing a git clone on a template. You're cloning something that's already working, and that's really nice. It's something that, using some generators in the past, you'd run into trouble with dependencies and such. So a git clone works great. We're going to look at the gulp task. We have a bunch of gulp tasks built in to facilitate getting this thing up and running as quickly as possible and testing it and developing it as easily and painlessly as possible. We're going to look at some things called the app route, routing, parameterizations, and child routes. Actually, that's not right. We're not going to look at child routes today. But we're going to look at the other three, and they're all just methods of organizing an application and handling routing. Next, we're going to look at view and view model conventions, basically how to write one particular route. And we're going to look at data binding and templating, and that's all the different tools that are available for writing a particular route. And then finally, we're going to kind of look at bundling. We're not going to go through the whole process of bundling. I have a bundled application, and I'll just kind of demonstrate the difference between before and after bundling. Some of the things we won't cover today is writing and using plugins. It's just, you don't have to do that. It's cool, but it's not a core Aurelia application piece. Writing custom elements and bindings. Custom elements you can kind of think of as web components. They're great, and they belong in any big application, but there are a lot of resources out there already, and it would add just some complexity to the presentation. Using the event aggregator. The event aggregator is great, and it's needed as well, but it also gets misused. An event aggregator is for taking many-to-many kind of event relationships. You can almost think of event bubbling. And most of the time people use it for one-to-one event eventing. And that's not a good practice, and so I don't want to introduce that and add complexity. And using most of the extensibility points. So everything in Aurelia can be swapped out. We're not going to look at swapping out anything. We're just going to use it as is today. So the first thing is it's easiest to clone from GitHub. And I am going to wait for my paragraph to spin up. We're going to go here, and we're going to run git clone. And it's already in there. So I'm using TortoiseGit for Windows users. It's a great tool. But this is all it takes to generate a new Aurelia application, and it's the preferred method. The one that most people are using is from the actual official Aurelia repository. It's called Skeleton Navigation. It's great. Please take a look at it. I have links at the end of the presentation. But that's it, right? So we just download that. And we have this Aurelia application. Except, dependencies are not bundled in with it. You don't want to commit your dependencies into a Git repository. They're all in the package JSON. And there's two commands, basically, to get your dependencies installed. It takes 5 minutes or so, so we're not going to do it today. But those commands are npm install. Of course, probably everyone is familiar with that. And the next one is JSPM install. And JSPM install is part of System.js, which is the kind of accepted module loader of Aurelia. And so what that basically does the same thing that npm does, but it does it in the browser, and it's very cool. One thing to note, and I just kind of wrote it down in case anybody kind of looked at the slide deck, later, is that command right there should be run if you run into issues. The reason is because GitHub limits your download rate. So if you do run into problems, consider using that. Skeleton navigation uses some other gulp tasks that we're not going to use, such as Karma, Protractor, and Jasmine, which is for end-to-end and unit testing. So we're not going to use that today. But we are going to take a look at some of the gulp tasks that are available. So up here, under Build Task, we have 4 different tasks here. And if we take a look inside, the Build task is concerned with just building the JavaScript. Now, Aurelia applications are built on ECMAScript 2015, and so we use Babel to compile them into JavaScript. Likewise, we also want to listen to HTML and build HTML, so we have a build task for that. But that's all straightforward. The next is a clean task, which deletes anything that needs to be deleted. The next is the serve task, and that's the most important task here. We use something called browser sync. And what browser sync does is it allows you to open up multiple browsers, say Chrome and Safari. And it'll keep those 2 browsers in sync at all times. So if you navigate to a route on Safari, you will also navigate to that route in Chrome without clicking. It makes it great, especially when it's time to test things. However, I ran into some trouble using it. There are ways to work around it, but basically I was building a game, and the game was a multiplayer game. And I would launch 2 browsers, and they would just make the same moves the whole time, and the reason is because browser sync was duplicating behavior in both. And so if you're doing anything where you're having 2 applications open at the same time, browser sync won't work for you. But that's the only case I've heard of that being a problem, so you probably won't run into that. Okay, so now we're going to look at the actual Aurelia application. And we're first going to look at the app shell context. Now you can think of the app shell as an Aurelia application has various different applications within it. Most Aurelia applications just have one, and that's the root of the application, and you build on top of that. Now for the template that I built today, I had 2 apps. The first being a login app that handles all the authentication. And that's a really nice paradigm to follow because it keeps all of your authentication separate from your main business logic, your main logic that you want for your users. But it's not limited to authentication. Anytime you have multiple sections that are not at all related, but you want to bundle together, you would want to use this strategy. And so if we look at if we look at main.js here, you can see right here. This is a basic Aurelia bootstrap. You probably won't have to write any of this code at all, but I did want to mention it because it's in the code. But I basically check to see if I'm authenticated, and if I'm authenticated, I go right to the application. Otherwise, I go into the login application, and I set that free. All right, so let's dive into an actual Aurelia application. Now, the first thing any application needs is a router. And a router will let you declaratively define all the different parts of your site that somebody can navigate to. And then Aurelia takes care of looking at that and deciding how to react. And so my application from before actually did not have a router in it. So I thought that would be the perfect opportunity to go ahead and add one to the application. And so this is what it used to look like without a router. All of the router code is right here. And so you see, what we have here is that app class. So the last slide we looked at said set root app. And so here's the app class. And when Aurelia loads this up, it looks at the class and finds this configure router function. And what the configure router function does is indicates to Aurelia that it needs to create a new router. And it tells Aurelia what that router ought to look like. And Aurelia looks at the configuration and just handles it from the browser perspective, so that when a user types in that URL, they'll get to the right place. And the main component here is this config.net. And we can do either a single string or a list of strings. In this case, I have a list of one string of the route to listen for. So in this case, it would just be the root route. We can give it a name. It has various uses, but they're not important, so I'm going to skip it. We're going to give it a module ID, which I will come back to. In this case, it's default. And then it has these two other attributes, nav, true, which allows you to observe the navigation model and use it in various ways, such as building a header on your website so that users can navigate between the routes, and a title, and that will be put on the title of the page. And so we can look actually at the HTML that's behind this. And this is what it used to look like when there was no router. And the bulk of the code for the page was here, and we're actually going to look at this later. But I'm just going to comment it out for now. And all it takes to get this router up and running, after defining what the router should be, is putting inside your HTML this router view. And that's it. I have some classes on there. They're not important. They're for styling. It's just putting a router view. And that tells Aurelia that whenever the user navigates to a route, go ahead and inject that route and inject the view into the router view. And that's all it takes to set up a router in Aurelia. Now, I said we'd come back to it. This module ID is default. And here's where Aurelia uses conventions. It says the name of the module is default. So let's look for a default JS and a default HTML. Let's create that default JS class and let's bind it to that HTML. And that's all in this just one attribute right here. So let's go ahead and look at that, those two files. So there's nothing here yet. I wrote the code already, so I wouldn't get any typos. I'm notorious for that. But assuming we had just created this default JS right after defining the route, this is what a route looks like. Now there's a few things to notice. This at the top, it's just ECMAScript 2015, syntax for importing new module. It's just ECMAScript 2015 for importing modules. So we're using these modules throughout our application. Aurelia Framework has this inject, which is the dependency injector for the auth service. And that's it. We have this class called default view model. We could put nothing on default view model and it would still work. Anything we put on default view model will be available to the view. Apologies. Is that better? Okay, great. I'm sorry. So all of this code is available on GitHub. So please take a look at it afterward if you missed anything. This is all the code that is needed. Really, all you need is this export class default view model. That's it. Now, in the constructor, I've injected this auth service. I'm using it throughout my application. So this is one way to inject something. Whatever I pass to this inject decorator, that's ECMAScript 2016, it's automatically injected into the constructor here, and I can just bind that to the view model and say this class has an auth parameter, an auth attribute, and it equals this auth service thing that I injected into it. So now let's look at using that auth attribute. So we're going to look at default HTML. And so assume we just created a new file. This is what it would look like. And it's the only difference it is between regular HTML is it's always wrapped in a template tag. And that template tag tells Aurelia, this is the thing I want you to inject. And so I gave a little header and some different properties here, but you'll see this $sign, open, close, curly brace, and all that is string interpolation. We'll look at that in a second. But it tells Aurelia, hey, run some code here, do something here. And in this case, we're telling Aurelia, look for that auth parameter and inject the session, the value of whatever session it is, into this place. Now, I kind of cheated. I used this 2JSON, and it's kind of, if you've used Angular before, it's kind of like a filter. It's just a way of processing whatever you inject. And actually, if we look at default.js, this is the definition of the filter. If it doesn't make sense, that's okay. Just know that it processes the input and does fun things with it. And that's about it. The other line here runs code, runs a method that's actually on this auth object, but it's all the same. It just binds this auth attribute on this default view model class to the view. Apparently I have run out of time, which is okay because that's basically all there is to writing an Aurelia application. I was going to write one more model that was a little bit more complicated. It was going to dive into some other things like two-way binding, as well as templating functions. Again, all of this code is available in GitHub. I was also going to, event handling is also handled similarly to just the string interpolation. Not much different. And then bundling and deployment. So the difference between the two, launching a non-bundled application has lots of dependencies. It usually takes maybe about 100 requests or so. Bundling gets that down to maybe about 10, depending on how much CSS you're using, and it's very, very fast. It feels very, very native. I have a result in the links here at the end here. So here's some links. The most important one is at the bottom, tinyurl.com, Aurelia JSDC 2015. That is a link to this slide deck. So you can download it. You can see all of my notes that I took. If there's any code that you missed or any ideas that didn't make sense, you can kind of review them. Additionally, it has this set of links. Also there, Aurelia.io, that's the Aurelia website. DavisMJ.me, that's actually my personal website. I'm going to be releasing blogs, templates, and other things. And then the third link is actually a link to this code in its completed form. If I had been a little bit faster, that's what we would have seen. Also some other blog posts that if you start getting into it and you're like, this is really good, but how do I do? The 3 blog posts written there are written by core developers, and they're extremely helpful and useful for getting into some of the deeper areas of Aurelia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing with us. 谢谢 Matt 对我们带来这个精彩的分享。那么因为时间限制的关系，也许还有些部分还没有办法很完整的报告完毕。如果大家还有一些疑问，或者是有事情想要向他请教的话，都欢迎在等一下休息时间到台前来向 Matt 询问或请教。那么我们下一场议程呢，将会在1点30分开始。这次的休息时间比较短暂一点，所以请大家要好好把握一下时间去休息。